I'm County Commissioner Amber Waldref, and I represent District 2, which covers the eastern part of the city of Spokane and some of the unincorporated parts of Spokane County. My guest today is Washington State's District 3 Senator Marcus Riccelli, and he's joining us via Zoom from Olympia. Welcome to County Spotlight.
Well, thank you so much, Commissioner Waldref. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I know you're very busy, so I appreciate your time. The state session began on January 12th, and it's already shaping up to be a very challenging one with a budget deficit grabbing the headlines, just like last year, unfortunately, where you had to tackle a multi-million dollar deficit. You're looking at that again this year. So, what are the current estimates, and how do you think a balanced budget can be accomplished?
Well, the estimates are fluctuating a bit. We'll have another revenue forecast that is a statutory date a little bit later on in session that will kind of give us the full picture. And that is within the remainder of this biennial budget and a 4-year outlook. For me, though, simply the priorities are to step one, scrub the budget and look for efficiencies, look for ways that we can make government more efficient. But then really identifying the most essential services. For me, that's for the constituents I represent in Spokane and looking across the state. And what I've heard very strongly from our community is access to healthcare, housing, making sure making sure nobody goes hungry in our community. So supports from a food standpoint, and education. So those are the big ones. And I think our job, a budget is a reflection of our values as a state, is to really promote a long-term, stable budget. I'm hearing that from our community. I'm hearing that from our business owners. And so, the way our tax structure is set up currently is a real challenge to that. And we have these huge ups and downs. And right now we're looking at a very tight budget with potential cuts and threats to some of our key essential services.
Well, I can relate because the tax system for the state is also the tax system for the county. And when sales tax is down, it really creates challenges to keep essential services. So we will also be facing tough decisions this year. So tell me more a little bit about that. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but there's always looking for efficiencies. There's looking at programs to cut or keep, and also raising taxes. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on how you see those conversations in Olympia.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, the governor is required to put out a budget, and he has done that. And that is, we say that the governor puts out a good first draft to look at. The legislature writes the budget, and we work collectively with all of our colleagues. But from my standpoint, some of those key services are in jeopardy. Looking at healthcare access, especially with HR1 at the federal level staring us down, potential cuts to healthcare, the subsidies. When we look at one of the places that I've worked hard to put funding into, and that's making sure that all kids, particularly, can get access to food, but adults as well. That could be in jeopardy. It doesn't take many hard looks to go to our local food pantries and even with our bigger folks like Second Harvest and Northwest Harvest to know that there's a real struggle out there. Education, particularly, we made huge investments in special education, but we don't want to go backwards. We want to make sure that every kid has an opportunity to thrive, regardless of the zip code they're born in, and particularly in some of our poorest census tracts in the state, which unfortunately are in Spokane County. And then there's just a lot of stuff around the edges that are so important to our community. We have domestic violence advocates talking about the supports that we provide at the state. We have people coming talking about investments in law enforcement. We have so many different things that could be honestly potentially on the chopping block. And so it's a good time for people to get engaged and find ways to advocate.
Well, I will hopefully be in Olympia soon, and I think it's even easier to engage than in the past because people can zoom in to hearings. And so if you go to leg.wa.gov, leg.wa.gov, I think you can get access to almost everything that's coming up on the agenda, correct? And and
Yeah.
how to participate in different hearings on different topics. So it's something that I think you guys have done a great job of making very accessible
Well,
to community
thanks for
members.
bringing that up, and certainly love the amount of advocacy you do for the community and your fellow commissioners to really engage actively down here. And what I remind folks is a robust democracy can only exist with an active and engaged citizenry, and we have made it more efficient and easier for people to participate because constituents from Spokane, people from Spokane who want to participate in the process, um, typically had to drive 5.5, 6 hours, give up a workday potentially, maybe not even get here because they were turned around the past to provide their input. And now there's opportunity for remote testimony, and that is something that has really improved our process and the engagement we have. And you don't actually have to say anything if you don't feel like it. You can just use technology to weigh in support or opposition to various things, bills that were brought up, etc. And so we really do take a look at that, and it impacts the way we consider policy interventions that are brought forward.
Excellent. Well, aside from the monumental task of figuring out how to balance the budget this session, what do you hopefully want to accomplish for the residents here in Spokane in District 3?
Well, I'd love to continue to work with our local government partners to fund things like the Crisis Stabilization Center, which I know we've renamed, and you can share that name. Uh, to make capital investments. This is really a way for taxpayers to come to us as legislators and say, we want those dollars reflected back in our community and infrastructure. And the capital budget is actually one of our bright spots. I will say we're in a supplemental year, so that means a $500 to $600 million capital budget in our supplemental budget year, where it's around $5 to $6 billion in the regular budget year. So, but there is an opportunity to make significant community investments. I'm always a really strong advocate to make sure we get as much of those dollars back to Spokane. Honestly, I believe part of my job is to try and go and get more than our fair share for this community. And I love working with our partners, but not just our gut partners in government, working with nonprofits, working with people who are providing housing, senior services, community services, etc. On a policy side, I've got a number of housing policy bills, which I think we'll get an opportunity to chat about later. So before we do that, I want to speak specifically to something that I know the county and the city have partnered on, and that's Maddie's Place. We do have a higher than average number of babies that are being born substance exposed. Maddie's Place is a dyad model, really working with the babies in those most formative first days. That are substance exposed to help set them on a good path. And when the opportunity presents itself to work with their mothers in a dyad model to help them on a road to recovery. And we're seeing tremendous outcomes. So I've introduced a bill to not only do what I've been working on, I've put about $7 million into Maddie's Place over the last 3 years. But we need to put them on a sustainable path. So this would be a state plan amendment to our Medicaid waiver to get payment. And until then, it would have a funding source through our opioid use settlement dollar or our opioid settlement dollars.
Well, that's great news. I'm very excited. I'm hopeful that you can get that bill passed because the work of Maddie's Place is just critical to put these babies on a path to success in their life and in our community, and helping the parents address the substance use issues very early so they can be successful as a family. Anyway, let me know what I could do to help on that. But I
Definitely,
also want to, yeah.
I want to say, and kudos to the county commission, to you all, to City of Spokane, and quite frankly, to a number of donors in our community that have working with state dollars. That full complement is to help keep them going. But again, we need to move them on a sustainable path. So I'm
Yes,
excited
yeah,
about that opportunity.
it's been a great partnership with the city and the county, and we've put a lot of funds of our mental health and behavioral health funds into the project. But really, we got to find a way for the Medicaid dollars to flow to these families that really should be eligible for those
Absolutely.
dollars. So, well,
Absolutely.
thank you of
Yeah.
our Crisis Stabilization Center, because really it's focused on recovery. It's focused on sobering beds so people can enter into treatment. So anyway, $3 million from the last session. We're asking for a little bit more this session and hoping to get that over the finish line, hoping to groundbreak on that facility very soon. So thank you. We also got $7.5 million towards water filtration for affected, impacted residents on the West Plains
Hmm.
from PFAS contamination in their wells. And so we are working on getting those dollars out this year and helping people stay safe and healthy. So thank you for your support of those dollars as well. Well, one of
Absolutely.
the issues you kind of mentioned earlier is housing, affordable housing. It's amazing how much the real estate market has changed here in Spokane, and with not enough homes being built all across the country after the 2008 crash and recession, we just don't have enough housing stock. So we need to build more housing, especially housing, as you know, for different income levels, especially low to moderate working family homes. So I've heard that there's been several bills that have been dropped. You and I had a little discussion on this when you were in Spokane. And then one of the projects that Spokane County is supporting is in my district, and it's called Nova Hillyard. It's a childcare affordable housing complex that the Northeast Public Development Authority is trying to develop on some land that was given to them from the city. And so it's a great project. It's near the north-south corridor.
Hmm.
And so that's just an example of one affordable housing project, but there's a lot of barriers and we need to remove those. So what bills and what are you thinking about the Nova Hilliard project and other bills that we could
Yeah.
support to get more access to uh, construction of affordable housing?
Yeah. Well, interesting. When I was in the House, I chaired the House Healthcare Committee, and I've long time said food is health, and housing is health too. We know people won't be on a sustainable path. They don't have a roof over their head. So I think this is one of the most critical things we could be focused on. There's actually a lot of bipartisan support. So we're just trying to find new tools in the toolbox. The Hilliard project, I think, is amazing. One, because it builds housing. Two, the accessibility, the potential for swing shift childcare is
Yes.
something that's in desperate need in our community. So I've been very supportive of that project. It's a little outside my district, but it's a community project. So I've been lending my support, and actually legislators from the third, the fourth, and the sixth district have been working to try and team up to get more funding so we can see that project go forward. So I'm extremely supportive of that. From a policy standpoint, the biggest bill that I worked on is an update to something that really is already on the books, and that's a tax incentive for the pavement to people bill.
Mm.
And this is really just an effort to make it pencil out for developers. We're not seeing enough projects use that incentive. And after discussion with the community, getting a lot of broad feedback here locally and now statewide, I think we've corrected some of the things that are in the way. So I'm hoping to work to pass that bill. Some of the things it does is it really focuses on that workforce and student housing, that middle housing. So at first look, it brings the affordable housing marker for that tax incentive from 50 to 25% of your units have to be built at 120 AMI. And at first, I was a little reticent to do that. But when I heard a bunch of low income affordable housing developers come and say we need that, it's really about getting that broad mix of housing. The other thing that we're really doing is we're bringing underutilized land to be eligible for the incentive, to really open up some tax incentives for things that are just sitting there vacant, that are not being used to their full use and could be going to housing. So we're really trying to incentivize it. So that's the big one that I'm focusing on. It will be a discussion here in Olympia. It would affect 5 communities in our state. So Spokane, Vancouver, Tacoma, Kent, and Bellevue are the ones that are interested in it, and it only applies to. And so I look forward to working with my colleagues to try and get that across the finish line. The other one is, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know the governor also identified affordable housing and housing as one of his priorities. How do you see that? Go ahead and talk about other bills, but I was wondering how you see that aligning with where the governor has put out some of his proposals.
Yeah, a lot of interest in policies because I think we need more tools in the toolbox. Look, I'm not going to, when we have barriers in place that the affordable housing units are costing too much money and not being brought online, I think that that's wrong. So I do think we need to bring down some of these barriers. The perfect policy, if it's not leading to more housing, is not the perfect policy. So we need to find a sweet spot where we have good balance on what we can build. The other bill that I think has been interesting, community driven, is we have a bunch of religious entities that have excess property and they want to develop affordable housing. They think it's according to their mission. they're not able to take advantage of some of our incentives on the books. And so I'm working with a House member, Representative Saladin, on a bill to allow religious entities to access this. And why it's on my radar is a number of our local entities came forward and said, we're ready to go. We need this tipping point, and they really advocated for it. And then finally, working with Council Member Klitsky and others, we are looking at a best use tax for land and really understanding if something is, if there's a parking lot in an area that should be developed to housing, how is that looked at as tax? That's more controversial. And I think there'll be lots of discussion, but it's a discussion that's worth having, how we utilize our land, particularly in our most urban dense areas.
And I know the governor talked about maybe reducing some of the red tape around permitting. So there's a lot of strategies that could result. Sometimes people think, it's just about money, but sometimes it is about these policies that end up putting a barrier or costing so much to the point that it just doesn't pencil to make it work. And we just don't have enough money in the Housing Trust Fund to be able to subsidize, right, all of the
Exactly.
housing that we need. So I
And
know
we
here in
should,
Spokane County, we'll be working hard to look at our policies too. We'll be looking at how many housing starts and permits and what can we do better. I think every community needs to be looking at that and making sure we're not putting up too many barriers. So,
absolutely. Streamlining permitting, making it more affordable should be a top priority. And also, we shouldn't pat ourselves on the back for bringing stuff online if it's not penciling out to actually hit the policy goal. A good bill with the best of intentions that is producing no more housing is just a paper tiger that does not accomplish what we want.
it sounds
So,
like the pavement to people one was kind of like that. It had really good, I mean, there's just a few things that you could do to improve the effectiveness of it.
yeah. And one of the things is implementation in commerce is their interpretation of the legislation has led to some problems, and they're willing to work with us. So my bill also cleans that up. They're also running it in
Oh, good.
separate language. But sometimes that administrative burden really is costing money or not letting projects go forward.
Well, on to another topic, and this one is more environmental. As you
Mhm.
know, the waste to energy facility, which is run by the city of Spokane, is a local asset though that serves most of the folks in the Spokane County area. It's a way for us to get rid of our waste and a carbon tax that the state voted to place on um, a variety of different places, right, that produce a lot of carbon emissions. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, however you see it, we're the only one that has a waste to energy facility. And so the carbon tax is going to end up costing ratepayers here a lot of money. Um, and the alternative is trucking our waste from Spokane County to other counties in the Northeast or Central Washington. And those dump sites also produce carbon. That's the unfortunate thing about waste. It doesn't really go away wherever you try and get rid of it. So um, it's been an ongoing topic. What do we do? How do we keep it more energy efficient and reduce the carbon emissions? But also, what are the options that we have? So I know we've run different bills, and this year the city and the county are supporting a bill to give us more time before the carbon tax would become effective on the waste to energy plant. So maybe we can look at ways to capture those carbon emissions and get rid of them in a way that would reduce the climate impact. What are your thoughts on this proposal to give more time to the waste to energy facility so we can continue using it and look for other solutions?
Yeah, I mean, well, I have introduced a companion bill. Representative Hill has introduced a bill um, in the House, and this, in essence, delays some of those things that would come online. Let me speak to why. I don't think it's fair for our taxpayers to see an increase to their utilities. Um, I think that we should do everything in our control to be more environmentally friendly, but this was really singled out and left out, and it doesn't make much sense. It doesn't make much sense to charge local taxpayers more dollars to increase carbon by hauling garbage to, by the way, Adams County, which is a poor community, and dumping it there. Meanwhile, there have been a lot of measures in place to make the waste energy more efficient and more clean. And this buys some time to really look at what are our next steps forward, and we don't provide a bunch of sticker shock and also add a bunch of pollution in an unneeded way. So this is one of those things where does anybody want to be hauling garbage or burning garbage? No, I don't think that's the case. But what's the best means to get there? And currently, it's more efficient and less carbon producing to use the facility we have. And quite frankly, we shouldn't be burdening low-income taxpayers, particularly, until we have a solution. So what I think this would do if we pass it is buy some time to come up with other solutions that might work. But until that time, you know, uh, I think this delay makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, we've tried a lot of different strategies and trying to exclude it from the Climate Commitment Act or other strategies. And maybe we just need to have a little bit more time to figure out how we can even make it more energy efficient and reduce the emissions. But yeah, there's no easy answer to disposing of waste. What we really need to work on is producing less waste.
I
And
really think that's it. You hit the nail on the head, Commissioner, and it's the same way with energy. These are our solutions for the future. Um, and I think, we also need to be more cognizant about what we put in recycling versus what we put in the trash and
yes.
more education around that. We see that as some of the most valuable steps to getting people to wasting less and recycling more.
So, as you mentioned, the Board of County Commissioners, we're very active. We have a legislative agenda that we've adopted, and thank you for meeting with us and already helping to sponsor some of the things we want to get done this session. We'll be heading to Olympia at different times over the next month, and I know we'll be working together on the waste to energy quandary as well as other things. So, is there anything else you wanted to highlight that you're working on this session? You can add any other policy
Yeah.
or budget items.
Well, I'll tell you a couple things. One, I'm working with a representative out of Yakima, Representative Mangeris, on an overdose mapping information program. This really would allow first responders, hospitals to share information when overdoses are occurring so we can get more real-time accurate information. So we know when there's hotspots, when our communities are being impacted and affected, it could also be seriously important information when, say, spiked drugs have come into our community. But overall, we just need more real-time information so that we can respond accordingly. And so that will be heard this week in Senate Healthcare. Uh, I am doing a bill. I think it's super important that we protect voter information, and this basically is at request of the Secretary of State that doesn't allow a single county auditor to just decide to turn over information to the federal government, like birth dates and social security
Mhm.
numbers, that would have to go through the Secretary of State's office. I think it's a really important voter protection bill, and it doesn't mean that that information might not, upon request, get turned over, but it's streamlined to the Secretary of State, so you don't have individual folks in different pockets in our state deciding they're just going to turn over information. I think we owe it to voters to have that kind of protection. So that's something I'm working on. Those are a couple that I would bring up. It's
Those
going
seem
to be a
very
short session.
important.
Yeah.
Yes, I appreciate that on the voter information. I think it's so important that that information is really something that Washington State has for voters. And it's when voters sign up to vote, they're not expecting that their information is shared. So this would be a new normal, and we need to pivot to make sure that is the normal,
Yeah,
that information is not shared. So I appreciate that you're keeping an eye on that. Well, it
absolutely.
sounds like you have a very exciting session ahead of you, and I'm sure we'll hear more from you in the next coming weeks. I really appreciate everything you do and the work you do to support the priorities of Spokane County. And any last thoughts or words as we finish up today?
Yeah, I'm grateful for the engagement of the county commission. I'm grateful for your work, Commissioner Waldref. I would just ask folks watching this program to engage. Please, if you're one of my constituents, or even if not, you can go on to my website and sign up for our e-newsletters. We're already in the midst of planning a teletown hall. We try in the interim to do mobile offices and town halls. So the engagement really does matter. And I hope you'll communicate with myself or one of my members of my staff, which are always here to serve. And let us know if you're coming to Olympia. We want to make sure that experience is open and accessible and go out of your way to make sure that this is your capital. And with that, I'm just grateful for the opportunity to chat with you and look forward to seeing you in Olympia and hope we can move the ball forward on a number of important local community issues
I
and
know,
state.
despite the challenges this session, I like the way that you're thinking positively about the capital budget, and there's a lot of things we can get done policy wise to help us build more housing. There's a lot of things we can do to invest in the community in different ways. It's not always money, but it's about allowing development to happen in the places that we want it to happen, making sure the incentives are in the right places.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Senator Riccelli. I really want to thank you for being my guest today. I'm County Commissioner Amber Waldref, and I want to thank you for joining us on Spokane County Spotlight.